in a society, the way we do our businesses. Today morning's call is an example. We are still struggling with technology, the way we make our financial transactions. And it definitely will have a significant bearing on the way we commute. Public transportation is my feeling. We may take a back seat for some time for the sheer fear of sharing a common space in a public transportation with other people for a longer time. Now, transportation in a common area is going to weigh heavily on the people. I mean, the whole notion of safety is kind of a concern right now. To add to that, the economical impact of the situation cannot be ignored either. So, people in India are going to be looking for cheaper, economical transportation. Therefore, the experts have opinion that the two-wheeler market in India may get a fillip post-COVID lockdown. Now, the users that are currently using buses and trains for their daily commute are likely to migrate. There is a very strong possibility of them migrating to two or three wheelers. Now, this brings a huge opportunity for electric mobility. The electric mobility, given the situation in India, EV is primarily going to be driven by the two and three wheeler segment. We certainly see a tremendous scope. And to gain more knowledge on the subject, today's session has been curated by engaging with senior officials from Government of India, esteemed speakers from India and overseas, who are here to give you a 360-degree view on the possibilities for EV and what is it going to be post-COVID and uh, onwards. The session will be moderated by Rajaji Maheshram, who is a partner with EY. Ladies and gentlemen, I truly hope that you find the discussions meaningful and engaging. Without taking much of your time, I would now like to invite Dr. O.P. Agarwal. Dr. Agarwal is the chairman for FICCI Working Group on Future of Mobility and also the CEO of WRI India. Dr. Agarwal will deliver his welcome remarks and also set the context from an Indian perspective. After which we will have Paul, who will set the context from a global perspective. Dr. Agarwal, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Nirja. It's a delight to be participating in this event. Thanks for the opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to all of you for this webinar on business continuity plan for electric mobility and rebooting to the new normal. As you are all aware, I don't have to sort of say this, but the coronavirus pandemic has really had a severe impact on economic activities around the world, and more so on the automobile sector. In fact, the nascent electric mobility sector has been very adversely impacted during this, and how it will reboot to the new normal is a question that many are asking. Nirja alluded to this in her remarks, and I think that's a very pertinent point that we should really be talking about. The central and state governments have allowed the automobile sector to restart its activities. To further boost the electric mobility sector, the government has also sanctioned the setting up of over 2,600 charging stations across 24 states and union territories under the FAME India scheme. I think this will certainly provide the needed impetus. Government of India has also been emphasizing the vision of our Honorable Prime Minister to become an Atmanirbhar Bharat, and in pursuance of this, a number of notifications have been issued, primarily encouraging localized production and assembly of electric vehicle components, thereby really reducing the import dependency. To my mind, this is indeed a step in the right direction, as the growth of a nascent industry can be very easily threatened if critical components are not available on a regular basis. This reliability of supply of these critical components is extremely important. We are all aware that electric mobility has several benefits for the country, from reducing dependence on imported fuels to improving air quality to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It also has the potential for reducing the life cycle cost of vehicle fleets. And it is in this context that it is really important for the entire electric mobility industry to overcome the adverse impacts of the COVID pandemic and somehow adjust itself to whatever will be the new normal. How it can do that is really the prime theme of today's discussion. I'm really pleased to say that today's discussion includes senior government officials, policymakers, private sector companies from a variety of stakeholders in the private sector. I'm further delighted that on the panel today we have Mr. Anil Srivastav, who is the Mission Director for the Mission on Transformative Mobility and Battery Storage at the Niti Aayog, in many ways really leading this entire charge towards electric mobility. We have Mr. Palash Roy Chaudhary, who's my co-chairman on the FICCI task force on the future of mobility. We have Mr. Paul Jensen, who's the managing director of the European Business and Technology Center, the EBTC. We have Mr. Mahesh Babu, the managing director and CEO of Mahindra Electric. Mr. Marius Okel, who's the project manager of the Indo-German Association Partnership Program. We have Mr. Kevin Kelly, head of Powertrain and EV, Europe and Industry. Mr. Rajaji Meshram, who's the partner at ENY, will be moderating this session. So once again, with these remarks, let me welcome you to this discussion. I hope it will be a very engaging and interactive discussion. Let me first invite Mr. Paul Jensen for setting the global context and then pass on the baton to Mr. Meshram to moderate the discussion. Thank you very much. Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, and as always, a pleasure to partner with FICCI for sessions on topics of such importance. Yeah, and I think we'll be partnering a lot more, working more intensely, because the COVID situation has indeed thrown up a lot of unknowns, and we all have to work and start thinking about what is that new normal that you also spoke about. Yeah, and having said that, I think in several discussions. I think as EBTC, the European Business Technology Center, engaging in bringing Europe and India together at so many different levels, and also in e-mobility, I think this situation could actually be an opportune time for e-mobility to shine. I think it's imperative that we use this momentary down, if you will, this new normal to reflect, but also to boost the market's growth through a reinforced focus on sustainable modes of transport. You also alluded to that, and so did Nirja. So I think it's now also a unique opportunity and unique chance to actually empower the e-mobility sector globally, and have car manufacturers, automotive manufacturers, who are early adopters of so many processes, procedures, technologies, solutions, went into that niche with an even more dedication and investments than before. But it's also the role of governments and policymakers, policy stakeholders, support this and help businesses through what we are now seeing as a supply chain transition, if you will, into new value-creating processes. I think the e-mobility era can become a true revolution, a game changer, if we also critically reflect on the true green contribution. And you yourself alluded to a lot of those elements of the green contribution. By assessing also the model in a circular way. There are examples of companies across sectors that are made up, so the waste of one industry becomes the fuel of another. So if you look at an e-mobility supplier tying up with a recycler, who will then, after end of life, take the batteries and use them for powering lights in villages, or powering stadia, or whatever. There's a lot of examples like that. And I think this crisis is without any doubt a real worst case scenario for all of us, for industry, for business, for governments, for countries. But it also gives us that chance to transform some of the key industry sustainably and for generations to come in our recovery plans. So I think if we think cleverly in our decision making, in our crisis management, we have some opportunity, and especially here in e-mobility, obviously being one solution for sustainable mobility. And I think we've seen several examples also of actually manufacturers who were in one sector, and I have one specific case of producing power components for power plants, now producing e-buses. And Nirja, you also spoke about public transport, how that might change. I don't know, is the new normal going to be less public transport because people are wary of being so close to each other, or for how long is that going to be the case? Is there going to be a change in consumption patterns? And what is exactly the opportunity for this segment? And at EBDC, we very much focus on this collaborative model for growth, and that collaboration is at all levels. It's between policymakers, between countries, between businesses from different sectors. It's business and policy, and it becomes quite complex, becomes quite comprehensive. But it also shows that there's a lot of opportunity and willingness, and if we all pull in that way, I think we have we can pull something out of this crisis that benefits us all. And I think specifically also pertaining to what the Indian government currently is doing in terms of the self-reliant India, following up on the Make in India. I think it's interesting for European businesses also to see how can we bring our technology, our solutions, our thinking to India, and work with Indian manufacturers to indigenize some of these technologies and create joint value propositions. And that's a big focus of what we do as EBDC. So I think the key word for all this is collaboration across levels, across sectors, across countries. And the reason that I'm also happy to be here is because I'm going to listen, I'm going to take notes of all the experts who are talking now, because there's a lot of thinking that I know that goes into this. And my mandate as EBDC is obviously to see whatever is required to put in place in case of, in terms of initiatives, platforms, support, frameworks, whatever, see how I and EBDC can, together with Vicky, maybe put something in place that will accelerate the growth of the rebooting of the e-mobility sector. So, Dr. Agarwal, without further ado, I'd like to pass on back to you, I think, and I look forward to a thrilling discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Let me pass it on to Mr. Mishram now.
Okay. So a very good afternoon. And first of all, let me thank Vicky for this opportunity to moderate this wonderful panel and the webinar on business continuity plan for electric mobility and rebooting to the new normal. I just wanted to announce that apart from this platform, people are also watching this interaction live on Vicky's YouTube channel. I think while yes, the crisis is something that is unprecedented, something that humanity has never faced before, I would want to maybe say and start with a positive thought that I have got so many messages, people saying that we didn't know there were so many birds in our colony. We never knew that the sky looked the way it looked, and we never knew that the air could be so clean. So I think the topic right now that we have today is in continuation with the same spirit of cleanliness, of purity. We are talking about electric vehicles. There was already a lot of forces that were coming together to make this electric vehicle and electric mobility happen. And I think the topic today is very relevant from that perspective. So the crisis is there on one hand, and then there is electric mobility and what's going to happen in the future. And we have an excellent set of panelists who will give us good insights and opinions about that. The way I will conduct the session is that I have a set of questions that I will be posing to the panelists. We have also received from the people who have registered for the event some questions, which also I will be posing to the panel. So I'll now delve right into it. I will mention the name of the panelist, and I will request for a response, and I'll proceed in the same manner. So to begin the session, I will first invite the session chairman, Mr. Anil Srivastava, for his opening comments. And he heads the mission on transformative mobility. And what I'm curious about is to hear his opinion on this transformative journey, this particular aberration of the corona crisis. What does it do to this transformative mobility journey? How does it move forward in India? So over to you, sir, to get your thoughts on that.
So you're on mute. Okay, mute. So you need to unmute.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mishram, and a very good afternoon to all of you. And it's nice seeing the veterans and the experts in this panel and interacting. Well, this disruption which has now come, but prior to this COVID, pre-COVID, we were talking about the disruption which would be caused by the battery, by the electric vehicles, by the transport as a service, uh, and the storage and autonomous vehicles, etc. So those were the expectations pre-COVID times I'm talking about. That is maybe December, January of 19 and 2020. And in between this major disruption came. But the issue is that how best we make use of this disruption and make best use of this opportunity. Now there are very clear roadmaps or the guidelines which could be adopted by the industry, and not only by the industry but all the stakeholders. How do we move forward from here? To my understanding, the planning should be in two perspectives. One is the short term, and other one could be a little long term in the consideration. Now, what could be the short-term perspective, as Neerja, you were just saying, as to the attitudes of the people and what the Rajaji just mentioned, the overall perspective of the people towards the life is expected to be changed with this pandemic, for the simple reason that the people have realized the importance of environment, pollution, and the life, the simplicity of the life which we have led for the last 2 to 3 months' time during the lockdown, and even further as the pandemic is still on. So in that perspective, what should be the planning? To my understanding, the short-term perspective, the short-term planning should be that how do we move forward and take care of the situation and take care of our own business. Now, if any one of you or other, I would expect that the people must have seen the live portal of Department of Heavy Industries, which gives the figures of the direct benefits which have been given under the FAME 2 scheme. And to my surprise, I find that the figures which have been given benefit, or the sales figures after March, are very significant compared to even the pre-March. I really don't know what does it show that even during this pandemic period, the electric vehicle sales have been significant in numbers compared to what they were earlier. So this is something really bugs me as to why is it and how is it that the figures could be so high. Now, what could be the long-term perspective? I mean, I must say the stakeholders, and particularly the OEMs and those who are in the industry, have to focus on the supply chains. They have to look at the supply chains as to where from are the supply chains based upon. So far, what was happening that the OEMs or even the component manufacturers did not really bother about the tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 of their supply chain as to where does the supply chain is there. But now that I think people will have to keep track of it and then try to work for shifting the supply chain in the country or under their control. And if it is going to be a global supply chain, then it should also be within the control of the OEM or the business. So that this is something very important in the long range perspective, which is very critical for the planning and to face the new normal which is going to be there. But then we have to understand as to what is going to be the new normal, and with that understanding we need to move forward. As far as government is concerned, we have number of schemes, and there are considerations which are going on as to whether any tweaking is needed for the FAME 2. And secondly, we are also coming out with some kind of suggestions as to what could be the post-COVID scenario and how to face or how to have the business continuity in the post-COVID period. But I really don't know when this post-COVID is going to take place. So this is something which comes to my mind when I think about the post-COVID era, the business continuity, and the new normal. And maybe as we move forward in the panel discussion, I would be contributing to it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, sir. The point that you made on The number of direct transfers in FAME going up in March is very curious and very interesting. So let me move on to Mr. O.P. Agarwal. So Mr. O.P. Agarwal, my question to you is that there is a global expertise here on the panel today on electric vehicles, and there must be a trajectory that electric vehicles adoption has followed in other countries. But in your view, how will this pan out in India? What is the difference between India and other countries in the adoption of electric vehicles, in your opinion?
Thanks, Rajesh. I think that's a very interesting question. Let me mention three different things where I think the Indian situation is very different from most of the developed world. One, if you look at our vehicle fleet, about 65% to 70% of the vehicle fleet is two-wheelers. The motorized vehicle fleet, about almost 2/3 is two-wheelers. The second is, if you look at these big cars, I call them the more than 10 lakh rupee cars, or more than 1 million rupee cars. These are the kinds of cars that are often getting electrified, say, in the US and Europe. These constitute barely 2% of our market. You know, a lot of the cars, even the cars in India, are less than the 10 lakh cars. You could call them the, whole range, these small vehicles, which are actually predominating even the car market, are less than the 10 lakh cars. So this is the composition of our vehicular fleet, where barely 2% are those bigger four-wheelers, number one. Second is the trip lengths in India. You'll be surprised that it's only about 12 to 15% of the urban trips which are more than 10 kilometers in length. The bulk of our trips in India are less than 10 kilometers in length. With the result that often we are concerned about the range of an electric vehicle. The range is really not such a big issue as far as the Indian market is concerned. The third important thing in India is really the weather. And given the weather and given the temperature concerns during charging and our weather patterns, I think that is something that we have to keep in mind in the Indian context. So with this, I mean, what I would say is perhaps our new normal, I don't know whether that new normal will be a permanent new normal or a temporary new normal, but the new normal will be something close to what Nirja was talking about. A lot of people say using metro rail systems, getting concerned about being in large crowds, moving into shared two-wheelers. Shared meaning they're not sharing it on each ride, but a single two-wheeler is used by multiple people, and that kind of shared mode of two-wheelers. And ideally, if those could be electric, I think there is a win-win there. As far as bus systems are concerned, personally, my view is the kind of people who use the bus systems really can't afford anything beyond that. And these are the kinds of people who might either move to bicycles, or you'll see buses operating at lower volumes. So to my mind, that is what will happen. Now, the people who use cars, or particularly use the bigger cars, I don't think they will change their travel pattern. They will continue where they are. A lot of others will start moving. In fact, that trend had also started happening, is moving into the Olas and Ubers that you see here. Particularly the younger generation is not too happy about owning a personal vehicle. They are happy with Olas and Ubers. I think that trend will also pick up. And if these Olas and Ubers move electric, for them, life cycle costs come down. So that again is something that may pick up. So that is what I see as kind of a new normal. Very difficult to say how long this will last, but that is the kind of situation that I see happening. Thanks for that, Rajesh.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting perspective. And I'll now take you from India to Germany. So my question is to Marius. So Marius, the question to you is that you've heard Mr. O.P. Agarwal on what he thinks about the trend in India. So my question to you is that what is the experience of Germany in electric vehicles, and what are the learnings and recommendations from the German experience?
Thank you very much for having me on this panel. A warm welcome from my side. I'm project manager for the association partnership program between us, the VDA, and the Indian sister associations ECMA and SIAM. And I'm totally aware that the situation when it comes to electric cars in India and Germany and also Europe is, as it was just mentioned, totally different. But maybe I could share also some like key learnings which we have developed in Germany and which we found out. Maybe I would start with 2-3 numbers from Germany. So finally now we have close to 380 4,000 cumulated new registrations in Germany at the end of May. And we have a share of battery electric cars of 55% and a share of plug-in hybrid cars of 45%. What is probably quite interesting in Germany is that we have since 3 years an environmental bonus. So every customer who buys an electric car gets like 3,000 euros, which is shared from the government, half the price or half the bonus, and from the OEM, half the bonus. And already we received during the last 2 years 206,000 applications for this environmental bonus. And also the government is highly investing in charging infrastructure. Currently we have about 27,000 publicly accessible charging points, and 14% of these are fast charging points. And maybe when it comes to the numbers, which is quite interesting, that we can still see that the programs are working from the German government, and it's all very much like working out. So we could give it we could raise by 100% in sales of electric mobilities just in this year 2020. And now in Germany, we could reach like a 10% share of electric cars. And if we compare it with last year, we just had 2%. So it's actually a very high increase. And the countries who are still above us are Norway with like 70%, Sweden with 26%, Netherlands 12%, but still if we compare it with China, that's only 4.2%. So I would say that the German system is working quite well, and it starts to really get in the market now. And maybe when it comes to the key recommendations, what we have learned and what we would also target for other markets, we would say that regarding the framework conditions for electric mobility, we really recall for a very high planning reliability. So clarity in policies is one of the most important points for us here. The stability of a regulatory regime, especially around electrification, is of crucial importance. And with regards to standardization of electric mobility, we would like to express our concern that all the regulations should be as internationally harmonized as possible, even though I know that quite every market has its own requirements, that's clear. So international standards bring more than 10 years of experience into account, so we shouldn't waste like our time to reinvent already existing things and concentrate on the cars as a product and the customer as a user. And we think also that incentives from the government are important to promote the adoption of electric vehicles, as well for the purchases of the cars and as well for the infrastructure. So customers need to be supported in their decisions to move to electric cars, as it still has some constraints compared to the internal combustion engine. And at the end, we also think that international standardization would provide some investments incentives. So as soon as the EU and Germany, for example, decided for CCS as a mandatory charging standard, the industry has a clear signal how to invest. And as long as the discussion is open, the investors will balance their decisions. So doubts, we would say, are the dangers of the future.
Great. I found that particular statistic very interesting, that it was 2% last year and it became 10% this year. I find that quite amazing as a statistic. So I'll now move to Mr. Mahesh. So my question to you is that we heard Mr. O.P. Agarwal saying that the younger generation is not so wishful of buying a car. They are wanting to have shared mobility. They want to travel in Ola or Uber. So my question to you is twofold, actually. One, I'm aware that you are actually pioneers in three-wheeler electric vehicles. So I would request if you could share a little bit about that, and also give your views on how in the fleet segment, in this shared cars, four-wheeler segment, how can electric vehicles play a role?
Thank you. I hope in these difficult times, everyone, the audience are safe along with their family. Yeah, these are all difficult times. So as Mr. Agarwal said, India is a very unique market. India is a very unique market, unlike personal transport to the penetration in Europe to the tune of 600 cars per thousand and US to the close to 900 cars per thousand. India's penetration of cars, personal cars, is just at 22 cars per thousand. But our urbanization has been rapid in the past, and the future prediction of urbanization have been has been rapid just before COVID. Now, if you want to become economically viable in India, you need to be in around the 10 lakh segment. That's what Mr. Agarwal has been saying. We can't produce Teslas and make people to move to electric. We will have to make affordable cars, and application have to be economical. So unlike what we heard from Europe, where government is giving $3,000 to $4,000 as subsidy, India has very limited resources on money, everything. So we need to utilize it optimum. So what is the best way of doing support is on fleet application. So the operating cost of an electric vehicle is low, that if it runs more, it can create an economic viability on a fleet operation. So the Mahindra, being a pioneer there, we have proved this in multiple applications. We have about 2,000 plus cars running on fleet, which are economically viable. In fact, they take rates lower than the fossil fuel vehicles to transport employees, particularly in corporate commute and things like that, because of operating cost low. So we have proved economically viable. Let's take our electric Veritos, which is a very full-fledged electric sedan, through which we have proved this economic viability. It has a triple whammy, I would say. Which vehicle run more on a day? And it consumes a lot of fuel, it generates a lot of pollution, and it makes economic viability. So if you convert those vehicles which are running more than 200 kilometers a day, actually you are saving a lot of fuel import, you are reducing a lot of pollution, and you are making that economic model viable. That's what we have done in fleets, and that's what we have proved in most of the fleet applications. We also learned, as Mr. Agarwal said, even in fleet, we don't run more than 200 kilometers. The personal usage is close to 40 kilometer average a day in very extreme condition, and most of them run around 20 kilometer a day. You and me run 20 kilometer a day to office at an average. So we actually see in fleet, the charging infrastructure problem also comes down, because fleet operators have captive charging and they do hub and spoke model. So you can always keep charging in a hub, and it is easy to handle. That's why fleet adoption of electric is pretty fast. And I'm happy the government is also understanding it and supporting such fleet in their FAME 2 subsidy. So the solution or technology, we strongly believe, has to be applicated to the society in which it is in. So India needs technologies and applications which will transform the electric mobility here, and we feel it is fleet. Having said that, we also have a technology of global scale. We are the one who are supplying electric powertrain to Sangyang Motors in Korea, where they are going to make their electric vehicle and sell across the globe. So we have a technology which is capable of giving a global presence. But at the same time, I think we have to think locally to give solution what is applicable to India. And I believe it is on fleet time being, and then going forward around 10 lakh vehicle, and then going forward to the other segment. Coming to three-wheelers. Three-wheelers is a very India story. I think all of us forget it, and then somehow don't talk about it, and ignore it. Three-wheeler is a very India's unique solution, because before the cars, if anybody wants to take a shared mobility quick within the, let's say, within 5 kilometer range, the best and easiest way to get into a three-wheeler is known to all of us. It's very unique to India. And I'm seeing this in Southeast Asia. It's becoming popular in Philippines, Indonesia. I'm now seeing even three-wheelers in France, Paris. So there are areas, and there are a lot of interest coming in three-wheelers. And the very unique part of electric three-wheelers is the one we learned when we launched our Mahindra Trio is actually overwhelming. We never thought it is so. We again brought in a commercial aspect to the three-wheeler. We proved in all the cases that the three-wheeler driver is able to take about 3,000 to 4,000 rupees additional because of the low operating cost per month when he owns a three-wheeler. Because the three-wheeler guys don't pay upfront all the money. He actually takes a loan. So the down payment is same between a fossil fuel and electric three-wheeler. It's just 50,000 rupees. So if you go with the 50,000 rupees, you can take Mahindra Trio or a regular fossil fuel vehicle. Then you pay higher EMI for Mahindra Trio and you pay lower EMI for a regular vehicle. But you will have to pay for the fuel. But you need not pay that much for the fuel in electric vehicles. So the net off per month outflow seems to be proved that it is beneficial when you do electric. So it is an economic viable model. We also give drive-by-wire technology in three-wheelers. Three-wheelers typically are with gears, only male operated, dominated. We are finding it a lot of women drivers now going and embracing Mahindra Trio in auto driving because it's now drive-by-wire. You just drive like a two-wheeler. And hence the fatigue has come down and it is transforming a lot of things into the market. So we believe that three-wheeler is India's story. In fact, we are talking about electric three-wheelers, India leading and going to other markets and taking that portion. So I think there is an opportunity there. Coming to COVID, I think what COVID has done is basically the industry was walking and trying to run before we fly. I would say the three stages of an industry. So we were about to run to take on to fly. Now it has brought back to walk. So I believe the fundamentals of EV, since the EV is the most efficient way of transportation, there is no reason the fundamental is shaken up by COVID. The fundamental is strong. Maybe there is an offset of the phase shift between running and flying. We may have to walk the ground for a few more months before we run and fly. That's what I see in these two segments.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, many foreigners who come to who visit in India, they want to sit in the tuk-tuks. So if it's an electric based tuk-tuk, then I think that will be an added curiosity. So from India, again, let me go abroad. My question to Kevin now is that in this post-COVID era, how has the consumer mindset changed? Is there a that the consumer wants to be more green positive, and will this consumer mindset, will it have an impact on the recovery from this crisis?
Thank you very much. And it's been fascinating for the last 20 minutes, half an hour, listening to everybody. And so thank you very much for having me. In terms of that consumer-facing benefit, that is something that I think we were mentioning a little bit earlier on, that is really transforming some of the way we look at it. In a lot of cases, obviously, everyone is now working from home as a requirement, which has driven a lot of people to review their lifestyles. We've seen as well, you talk about the improvement of air quality, whether that's in India or in likes of China, and we've seen it in Europe, heavily focused around Italy as well, which was the first country to go into lockdown. And what we're seeing is a couple of things coming through the consumers. One, they are much more likely now to be looking at green technologies and green solutions. They are more green aware. They want to understand about their impact on air quality. And the second aspect is working from home and how that is going to rebalance the way consumers actually view their relationship with vehicles. Now, in many cases, consumers said range is not going to be sufficient for my driving. I drive X amount of miles per day. What they're now starting to say is, if I'm going to work from home 3, 4, 5 days a week, do I need a diesel car? Do I need a gasoline car? Do I need something with a combustion engine? Or can I actually have a vehicle that can be electrified, whether that's plug-in or EV? So we are definitely seeing that the consumer side of it is much more beneficial. And we see that also in Europe. If we look at European car sales, EV, not just in Germany, where Marius talked about earlier on, but entirely across Europe, in France and Italy and UK, EV sales are much more robust than combustion engine vehicles. And we're seeing this because of things like caffeine incentive. Consumers who are buying EVs are not cancelling their orders. So when the market declined 98% in Europe in April, the EV market only declined 23%. So we can see that consumers are still looking at these vehicles as a viable solution. So I think going forward, this will change. The consumers are much more likely to buy EVs. And I think as well, that's going to have a massive impact on the way OEMs make their strategies. Because now, instead of looking at the EV market as a market I have to adopt because of CAFE compliance or regulation or to be seen to being green, now there is actually a customer. So now they have to organize the supply chain, they have to launch their products, and it will accelerate how OEMs bring EVs to market, not just in Europe, but elsewhere in the world as well. So hopefully that answers that question. Thank you.
Okay, that was a very interesting perspective. So I'll come back to India now on my question. So while we are speaking about shared mobility, we're talking about two-wheeler sharing of the fleet segment. But the question and the point that Neerja mentioned right in the beginning, what about consumer confidence? So my question is to Palash and to give you a perspective on how will people start adopting public transport, and what can we do in these public transport systems, be it shared mobility, fleet management, or even shared two-wheelers or buses, to make people feel safe to come back to public transport. It'd be good to know your views on that, Palash.
Sure. Thank you, Rajaji. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you. See, my take on public transport is that in the context of India, public transport is an essential service. I agree with Neerja and Upi that there will be a certain segment of people that might move to personal two-wheelers mobility, but that would still leave hundreds of millions of people who would rely on a reliable public transport system. We, as a nation, we are a resilient country with a short memory. So in my mind, I have no doubt whether people will come back to public transportation or not. The only question in my mind is how soon, right? And before I delve into at least 3 or 4 pointers in what we should do, I just wanted to take a minute to endorse what Mahesh was saying earlier. So I run India's largest electric three-wheeler fleet, about 1,500 vehicles. Before we shut down for COVID, we were doing over 100,000 passengers a day. And we have observed that, and our vehicles run pretty extensively, over 100 kilometers per day, and we move over 100 passengers per day. And the economics work out beautifully. Our tickets are still 10 rupees. It's one of the cheapest modes of transport that you can get in the private sector. So consumers are benefited, the environment is benefited. As Mahesh was saying, and I fully endorse, that the drivers end up making 3,000 to 4,000 rupees more in this system as compared to the conventional hydrocarbon three-wheelers. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. Now coming back to what we should do to bring consumers back to the public transportation system, I think there are 3 or 4 concrete steps that we need to take to rebuild consumer and commuter confidence. Number one is, in my mind, is use of technology and process. So when technology, right from going to fully digital transactions, moving away from cash, ensuring that all the commuters that use the public transport system have Arogya Setu or similar apps, and they are green on that app, use of thermal scanners and other similar technology interventions. That's one. And then secondly, ensuring that there is a standard operating procedure for operating mass rapid and transport systems around the country, using best practices from around the world, whether it's social distancing, limiting the number of passengers per vehicle, odd even dates, staggering opening times of various establishments, etc. So there has to be a standard uniform rule book that we need to establish across the public transport systems around the country. That's step number one. Beyond that, what we must do is enforcement and compliance. So concerted effort has to be made to bring together large organized players. So if you take, let's say, Delhi NCR's example, I think what we should do is bring together DMRC, the Delhi Transport, the bus service, DTC, players like us, private players, Smarty, who combined transport, hundreds of thousands of people a day. And through these organized large players, we can ensure full compliance and enforcement of the standard operating procedures that I just mentioned. Right now, what's happening, unfortunately, is people like DMRC are shut down, and the unorganized local players are allowed to operate with 4 passengers in a vehicle, flouting all kinds of compliance directives. And that's not helping the COVID situation. And it's actually creating more panic, and the situation is not being helped by that kind of an approach. So first is technology and process, standard operating procedures. Second is compliance and enforcement. And the third is communication. Unfortunately, what's happening today is anytime you switch on the television, there is this sensationalization of COVID. Today we have reached this peak, tomorrow we have crossed that peak. I mean, that's happening, we know that, but by showing 100 times the same clip about how many people are dying of COVID is not helping anything. The real facts are, in the last 3 to 4 months, only about 10,000 casualties has happened. If things were normal, more than that number of people would have died in road accidents. So we need to create a media, a counter communication blitz, if you will, to build confidence in commuters that, look, nobody knows when COVID is going to end, but that doesn't mean we're going to paralyze our economy, paralyze our lives. We have to come out, use the public transport systems, use common sense, follow the protocols, and things will be safe. So I think it's a combination of these 3 or 4 things which will be quite helpful in bringing commuter confidence and bringing people back into the transportation systems.
Thank you, Palash. So I think I'll kind of go back to Mr. Anil Srivastav. Sir, you have had a chance now to listen to the various panelists, and I'm sure they must have brought a lot of thoughts to your mind. One question that was raised was on batteries specifically, because battery is such a big component in the electric vehicle, and indigenization and bringing down the cost of the battery was also one of the questions that was raised by one of the registrants of this conference. So a couple of questions to you, sir, on the battery side, and generally your reaction on listening to all the panelists so far.
The prices of the battery have gone down more than what were anticipated in 2015, 2016, 2017. And when we see the prices which were there in December 2019, they were lower than what were the projections by the experts. And it's also, as the Stanford professor says, that these are the experts, those who really make the wild and of the target guesses and recommendations. And he quotes the example of the adoption of mobile phone in USA from 1985 to 2000. So, so battery prices are going down as anybody's guess. We in the government are also trying to have the investment to encourage the cell manufacturing in the country by providing direct fiscal incentives for per unit of the cell manufactured, and then getting some direct subsidy for that. But yes, the lithium ion is something which India has to have the manufacturing of the cells. Then again, there's a lot of work going on the technologies or the chemistries of the lithium ion, which chemistry was going to survive and how long. But whatever is there currently, a lot of work has gone in, and it is quite a stable technology on the cell manufacturing. Now, battery is going to be critical in the Indian context, also from the point of view of the storage and the renewable energy, for which we have extremely optimistic targets which our Prime Minister has set up, something like 500 gigawatt hour by 2030, and by 2022 we are going to achieve 176 gigawatt hour. We have already done more than half of it. So with that kind of a renewable energy generation, and also one cannot ignore the fact that the generation and the storage cost of a renewable energy is now coming at par or even lower than the generation and storage cost of the fossil fuel power stations. And that the latest tender from the SECI has demonstrated. Now with the power being generated, stored and used locally, then the investment in the grid infrastructure is also going to be all that redundant, microgrids or nanogrids, whatever we may call it, but it is going to be the future, and that's the disruption which is going to take place. And it is also going to have its impact on the adoption of the electric vehicle. Now, very often from the hinterlands, it is said that how do you charge the vehicle when there is no power? How do you run the air conditioner when there is no power? And likewise. So all these issues will be there, and they are all interlinked. So from that perspective, the battery or the cell manufacturing in India is also very, very critical. Now, a lot of views have been expressed by Palash and OP sir about the shared mobility and the new normal which is going to be there. To my assessment, India is quite open to the shared mobility as to whatever could be there. So it is going to be there, and as I look at it, COVID scenario may last for another 3-4 months or whatever be the duration, but then it is going to be there, and as rightly said, two-wheelers, three-wheelers are going to be adopted in the country. So the entire mindset is going to be in favor of the electric vehicle, and why it should not be so? For the simple reason, the cost of operation is 1/10 of the running a petrol diesel vehicle. The life is 2.5 times of a motor than an internal combustion engine, and maintenance is again 1/10 of a electric motor than the internal combustion vehicle. So these all things are being now is driving us towards the electric vehicle adoption, and it is going to be so. And very interesting facts given by Mahesh about the three-wheelers and also about the shared three-wheelers by the Palash. So I do endorse all these opinions, and we would be moving in that direction.
Thank you, sir. I think we are already at around 12:55, and we have 5 to 10 minutes left of our webinar. So I request if the next, I'll just ask two more questions. I'll just request if the panelists could keep the responses as brief. I am a little curious to ask this question to Marius, that you have said that there are a lot of incentives, almost close to 3,000 euros that was given as an incentive. But in the COVID scenario, has German government taken any other special initiatives? Question to Marius.
Yes, there was maybe quite interesting development how it's come out. From my side, we can say that from the perspective of the German automotive industry, it was actually required, or we asked the government for a bonus for every kind of car, so also the internal combustion engine, to really reboost the economy again. But then it has been finally decided 2 weeks ago that the German government provides a bonus of now 6,000 euros. So they even doubled the bonus for the electric cars. But what is quite interesting from our side is that the government also used somehow this kind of economic reboost program for also kind of a climate change program, I would say. So what was interesting is that they doubled the amount for the bonus for the electric cars, but on the other hand, they also said that they will not just work on EVs only. So they also included a new strategy for hydrogen, and they included in the whole program a new strategy for so-called e-fuels, and which is quite interesting from my side, because there is some fuels now in the market which you produce out of renewable energy, but at the end they will be CO2 neutral, and that's quite interesting because with these fuels you can also target the whole fleet and already like the stock of the cars which are already in the market. And I think that's quite good that the German government took this decision, so not to only focus on EV only, to see other things also, how to get to climate neutrality. So that's a very good thing from our side. And at the end, we believe every time that also international cooperation is very important, and that maybe the government, they should define the emission targets and then also give the industry some perspectives how to reach it. So that was my answer. Thanks.
Okay. Mahesh, my question to you, and I think a question has also been raised in the chat box about import substitution and how do we become Atmanirbhar and self-reliant with respect to the components required in manufacturing. Because while we are importing a lot of fuel, and that's the negative in these oil and petrol-based cars. The question is that if in EVs also we have to import a lot of motors, or then we are sitting with the same problems. Indigenous components for EVs in India. Mahesh, questions to you.
Yeah, are you able to hear me? So it's a very valid question. If you look at India, the way it has to transform in electric mobility, it can't survive by just.
Mahesh, I'll just request you to keep your answer brief because we are kind of at the end of the conference. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a very valid one. If you look at where we started and where we are today, I think if you look at our Mahindra Trio, except the cell, everything else is localized. So the PMP and the FAME2 is very well linked towards localization. So government has made it mandatory for industry to localize certain things, and it's very much covered under the FAME2. And we are all aligned and we are working towards it. Just to tell you, like Mahindra Trio, except the cell, everything else is localized, made in India.
Thank you for that. So this brings me to the last question. And I would pose this question to Palash, and I would also request him, after answering this question, to also giving his closing comments and vote of thanks. So Palash, my request is first answer my question, and then you can give your closing comments. So the question is that, I have been in some conferences with some senior leaders, and there was one statement that they said which got stuck to me, and which they said, do not waste the crisis. Do not waste this crisis. I mean, use the crisis for structural reforms, for doing something which in normal times would not have been able to do. So my question to you is that, how do we use this crisis as an opportunity for the electric vehicles mission? So that's my last question as the moderator. Over to you, Palash.
Rajan, thank you so much once again. And I completely agree that every crisis offers an opportunity for reset. And we must seize this opportunity because it's of strategic importance to us as a country. Our expert panelists have already spoken about the fundamental shift in behavior and the enhanced acceptability of the commuters and the appreciation that everybody in India has on the positive environmental impact of COVID. So we must seize this opportunity. The other strategic piece is that historically we've been importing oil. So from an energy security standpoint, we were importing billions and billions of dollars of oil from the Middle East. Now, unfortunately, we're importing billions of dollars of cells and components from places like China. And in the current context, it makes a lot of sense to realign our supply chain. So third point is our Honorable Prime Minister has already given the clarion call for Atmanirbhar Bharat mission. And under that, as Mahesh was saying, and Anil sir has also spoken extensively on this, that the government is trying to promote the manufacturing of components, of cells in India. And I think what we should do is only enhance it in the current context, ensure that we have a gigafactory, cell factory in India, and the demand for such a factory should be driven through our public transportation system. We have a very large public transportation system. If we can bring in policies to ensure that there is a steady migration of vehicles from hydrocarbon burning vehicles, ICE engine vehicles, to electric vehicles over the next 4 to 5 years, we could easily justify the investment that is required for a gigafactory in India. Similarly, our OEMs are already well advanced in the path of indigenization, and that only will continue to enhance as the acceptability of electric vehicles go up. The continuation of FAME, Anilji already spoke about, so I won't go there. But what we must do is a cohesive action, a deliberate action to ensure that we take this opportunity to drive the electric mission by putting the critical components of the ecosystem in place, both from the demand side as well as supply chain side. So I will end those comments there in the interest of time, and then I will move on to the my duty of proposing the vote of thanks. So it's a pleasure for me to propose the vote of thanks for this wonderful session this afternoon. I'm sure all of you agree that we've had a very informative and a very interactive session, and a lot of very interesting points have come out. We are grateful to Sri Anil Srivastava for taking out valuable time from his super busy schedule to address the webinar today, and also give deep insights on what the government is trying to do. With such encouraging statements from the government, we are sure that a close collaboration between industry and government will take this industry to near heights. We heard from all our expert panelists that in the mid to long term, driven by fundamental shift in consumer behavior, there is a huge opportunity for the adoption of electric vehicles. We obviously understand that India and Indians appreciate the environmental impact that COVID has had. If there's any silver lining, it is the environmental impact of the city air cleaning itself, the rivers cleaning themselves up. So that's one fundamental shift that's happening. Second fundamental shift that we can begin to see is that there is a wider acceptance of working from home. So commute over time is something that we need to closely focus on, how that the commute from office to home and home to office will change over time. And in its place, we are seeing a significant increase in the last mile delivery of goods. So electric vehicle adoption in the logistics and delivery landscape is going to become even more prominent going forward. We've already heard from our panelists that the current generation believes in shared economy. So the adoption of electric vehicles in fleet operators, again, expert panelists talk in details about that. So there are all of these fundamental macro shifts that are slowly taking place, and we have to be cognizant about that and seize the opportunity to address that increasing demand that is facing us. I would like to thank my fellow panelists for joining us today. Mr. Paul Jensen, Mr. Mahesh Babu, Mr. Marius Okel, Mr. Kevin Kelly, and of course, Rajaji yourself for conducting this wonderful session. My sincere gratitude to the industry members, delegates present, and my heartfelt thanks to FICCI for organizing such a relevant and timely web conference. A sincere thank to our chairman, Dr. O.P. Agarwal ji, for leading the Future of Mobility team in FICCI, and also for his insights into the future of mobility in India. Lastly, I would like to thank our strategic partner for this webinar, European Business and Technology Center, EBTC, for joining us today. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and stay safe. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I was calling you to